We'd like to thank our sponsors for this week's drasha, the Halpern and Wachschlag families, to commemorate the second yortzeit of beloved husband, father, and grandfather, Rabbi Jacob Halpern, Zichron Livracha, Rav Yaakov Yisrael ben Rav Asher Yeshaya, the 21st of Cheshvan. Of course, so many of us in the community have very, very fond memories of Rabbi Halpern as a person of great passion for Yiddishkeit and people, anyone with whom he came in contact with, and the opportunity to connect people to Hashem and His Torah in a stronger way was something that energized Rabbi Halpern in the most beautiful of ways. And as a community, we certainly miss him. His neshama should have an aliyah. And the drasha is also sponsored by Debbie and Jeff Weinstein in honor of both of their daughters, Lily and Hannah, celebrating being Benos Mitzvah, and Mazel Tov to Lily and Hannah and Debbie and Jeff. And you should have much nachas from both of them, and they should both give us so much pride as a community. Mazel Tov. The beginning of this week's Parsha is a very striking account. We're shown the remarkable hachnasas orchim, the remarkable hospitality of Avram Avinu, that he and Sarah together demonstrated towards his three guests. And the Torah goes into great detail about Avram offered them this, and Avram offered them that, and Avram ran here and there, and this is what he asked Sarah to do. Everyone's working. And it's such an interesting thing. Of course, we know there are so many halachos and ideas that the Torah doesn't explicitly write, and it hints to it in this word or that letter, and the Gemara learns all these things from it. And here you have the story of what Avram did for his guests being laid out in great detail. So many prominent halachos, laws, aren't laid out in remotely the same detail in the Torah, at least not explicitly, as the story of what Avram did. And we know, of course, that the Torah is teaching us that, of course, there are many laws in the Torah, but another very significant component of the Torah is how we are as people. And we need to reflect on how Avram and Sarah together hosted their guests, and we need to be those types of people, both in the specific, very important deed of achnasas orchim, of hosting people, and in general, how we interact with people and how we perform kindness towards others. But there's an irony that, for whatever reason, hit me this year. So Avram worked so hard to provide food and drink, and the guests turn out to be malachim, angels, which means that they don't need any of it. Now there's a whole discussion. The commentators, to what extent did Avram understand they were angels? At what point did Avram understand they were angels? We could have a whole detailed discussion about that. But the bottom line is that the Torah makes a point of recording for us the great effort that Avram expended to provide food and drink for beings who didn't need one bit of it. Isn't that strange? Think of all of the situations in which Avram and Sarah hosted people. Of course, there's another reason this event is being recorded in the Torah, because of the conversation the angels have with Avram about having a child. Of course. But there's something very striking. Torah goes to great detail for what he did, and what he did made no difference. No, they didn't need it. So, I don't know. I don't know if the question resonates with you, the audience, or not. To me, it just hit me in a certain way this year. And I was thinking about it, and I think there's a very powerful lesson, because it turns out that the guests were very distinguished personages. It turns out that they were. Maybe personage isn't the right word. They were very distinguished beings because they were angels. And there's something very powerful about the fact that we recognize that all of the work that Avram did, by definition, had nothing to do with their distinguished status. Because if he was aware, acting, whatever it is, towards their distinguished status, he wouldn't have worked hard to get them food and drink. So by communicating this to us and specifically delineating what Avram did, the Torah is teaching us another wrinkle about Avram's kindness for people, which was that it wasn't if the person was a VIP, that's when Avram worked. Avram worked that way for anyone and everyone. And the way that becomes so clear is the aspect of these beings that was so distinguished doesn't even correlate with what Avram worked hard for, which means Avram's work wasn't about recognizing who they were. And it's interesting when you think about it, in Judaism, we have great emphasis on the concept of kavod. There are certain people to whom we owe honor. There's an idea of treating a Torah scholar with honor. There's an idea of treating an elder with honor. There's an idea of treating parents and other relations with honor. And that's a very real Jewish idea. But chesed, kindness, is not defined by whom we need to have honor for or how we honor them. Chesed is something else. Chesed is there's a human being there. You know, the story is told, and there are all these versions of the story. Those who have had discussions with me know the more versions of a story I hear, the more skeptical I become about the whole story to begin with. But I think the point of the story is a very significant point, and maybe maybe it's a true story, and maybe the version I'm about to relay is the correct one. I don't know. The story is told, I believe it's told about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha, the great Torah scholar who was famous in the Jewish people in his time. And he was traveling from one point to another point. He was being driven in a wagon, and it was a very, very cold night. And it ultimately became clear that he and his wagon driver had to stop over somewhere for the night. It was very late at night. It was very cold. And they needed a place to stay. Snowing, you get the picture. They needed a place to stay. And they couldn't find anywhere. You know, whatever buildings, houses, homes they saw, they knocked on the door, no one would come to the door. People didn't want to get out of their beds. And finally they got to an inn. And they knocked. I mean, it's an innkeeper. They weren't asking for chesed. They were asking, I mean, they would pay, you know. This is what the person does for a living. You know, the innkeeper finally got out of bed, kind of peeked downstairs, saw it was just two people, not a big ticket item. He really wanted to just go back to bed. It's cold. They kept on calling and begging. Finally, he came downstairs. He said, I don't want to deal with you. I don't have any rooms available. I'm busy. I'm tired. They begged. And finally, he said, fine. You'll come in. You know, you just stay off to the side over here, far from fine accommodations. But at least they had a place inside to sleep for the night. So that was good enough. Okay. A bit later, there's a large ruckus outside. And there was a Hasidic Rebbe, forgive me for forgetting which Rebbe. There was a Hasidic Rebbe who was traveling with a large band of his disciples, of his Hasidim, of his followers. And they needed a place to stay. So whatever, think 20, 30 people. This is amazing. They knock on the door. The innkeeper hears the ruckus. The innkeeper comes down with great alacrity, lets them in. He says, absolutely, I have room for all of you. I'll take care of all of you. This is the best inn around. Let me get you a meal. Let me get you something to drink. And they were having a wonderful, this is a Hasidic Rebbe traveling with his followers. They didn't know if they'd find a place to stay. They were so grateful they found a place to stay. And they were celebrating the fact that it all worked out for them. And The Rebbe excused himself for a moment, and as he's passing in the hall, he looks off to the side, and he sees a person just off to the side, clearly not in very good accommodations. And the person looks familiar, and he looks closer, and he sees it's the great Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, just like on some mat on the floor over here. And he said, is that you? Yes, it's me. And the Rebbe was livid. Of course, the Rebbe was livid. He called in the innkeeper in front of everyone. He said, do you have any idea who this man is? He's one of the greatest scholars of the Jewish people. A remarkably pious person. What are you doing? Jewish innkeeper, by the way. What are you doing? And so now the innkeeper is publicly shamed. And his big customer isn't happy with him. That's also not good. The Rebbe says to the innkeeper, you need to publicly ask his forgiveness, mechila, right now from the great Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, with all of us sitting here. He asked his forgiveness. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik said, no, I don't forgive you. The Rebbe says, you better get his forgiveness. This is a big problem. He asks, long story short, the version of the story that I know is Reb Chaim Soloveitchik says to him, my dear friend, what are you apologizing for? If you're apologizing for the fact that you didn't treat Reb Chaim Soloveitchik in the right way, you're forgiven. But don't you understand? There's something else you need to apologize for. You need to apologize for the fact that you treated any Jew that way. Obviously, we need to treat all of humanity with respect and dignity, but we do have to see every other Jew as part of our family. I can forgive you for Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, but I don't know if you're asking apologies, asking forgiveness for having treated anyone that way. So the person asks forgiveness. The story goes that Reb Chaim said, I would like you to be a guest in my home one day, and I'll show you how I think a guest should be treated. Okay, it has a very warm ending. But the story is a powerful thing to think about. We are people of goodness. We are people of kindness. What's the entry card to receive that kindness from us? Is it anybody? Is it only people who we have a unique level of respect for? Is it only people who are prominent? Is it only people who are our friends? So I think what we see from Avram Avinu in this story at the beginning of the Parsha is it's obvious he wasn't doing it because they were malachim, angels. It's obvious he was doing it because that's how we would have treated anyone. And I think this is an ideal time to think about all kinds of ways that we treat people, but maybe particularly hospitality, particularly because we're in COVID times. Obviously, some of us are creating circumstances to be able to host guests in a way that we feel is safe and healthy, and that's wonderful. Many of us, and I dare say most of us, probably are not doing that right now. And we all have to find our own comfort levels, and we all have to be thought out in terms of what we're doing. But if you're sitting at a table, and it's maybe it's you alone, maybe it's you with a spouse, maybe it's you with a friend, a relative, maybe it's a whole family. And how many times over these months have we said to ourselves, wow, I remember back to the nice times where I was able to have guests at my table. When will I be able to have guests at my table again? Ask yourself a question. Next time you think that to yourself, you ask yourself a question. What do you miss about having guests at your table? So surely we all have guests that we really have very special relationships with, dear friends, relatives that we have very special relationships with, and we miss getting together with them. Surely that's one of the things that we miss. But my guess is that that's not the only thing that we miss. My guess is we miss something else as well. My guess is we miss the feeling of doing good to another person. We miss the feeling of understanding another person's world a little bit more. We miss the feeling of calling someone up and inviting them to our home and hearing that, oh, wow, that would be so nice for a moment. If that's part of what we miss, are those things only for our good friends? Are those things only for well-known people in the community? Let's take these times where we miss having people at our table, and let's really remind ourselves what we miss as B'nai Avram, as descendants of the great Avraham. What we miss is that act of kindness. And we should be thinking to ourselves, God willing, when we're able to have people again, let's make sure to have the people at our table who, to be very blunt, might not be the most sought after guests in Ketmel. Maybe not. Maybe they even get on our nerves a little bit. Maybe. We have to decide what we can and can't do. We all have our limits. We have to be respectful to our limits, and we have to be respectful to the limits of the other people in our families and homes. But to think that way and to ask ourselves how I can make my home truly open and truly welcoming and not to be so discriminatory in terms of who benefits from my kindness and my warmth. And along these lines of looking at a person and not being too discerning necessarily, I'd like to change the subject for a moment. And that is, this has been a very tense time. Besides COVID, this has been a very tense time in the world of politics. And we've all been touched by it in one way or another. And the election is a very important thing. And we care about it, and we should care about it. And we have strong opinions as to who we want to win. And we should have strong opinions as to who we want to win. But sometimes we go over the line. And I might firmly believe that this should be the president or that should be the president. This one or that one should be the president. And I might firmly believe that you made a mistake in who you voted for. But it shouldn't be that I look at another member of the Jewish people and say, Republican or Democrat, Democrat or Republican. It should be that I look at them and I see this is my brother, this is my sister. You know, I dare say that there were tensions leading up to the election. And I'm recording this Thursday afternoon. My assumption is there will continue to be tensions in the aftermath of this election, in terms of questions about the tallies. I hope I'm wrong, but my guess is there'll be a certain amount of tension after the election as well. And I think for the time being, most of us are in a little bit of a suspended state. Sort of not exactly sure what's going to happen. Not exactly fully animated yet about our views of this state is right and that state is wrong. And this is humbly the perfect time when we're not so hot. Whoever voted, voted. Whatever is going to be, is going to be. Just to take stock a little bit and to just keep on reminding ourselves that whether or not my neighbor, my relative, my coworker, my friend, the person davening down the road from me in shul, whatever Whoever they did or didn't vote for, that's not what defines them as a human being. We have much more core things of who we are. We're all of humanity is Tselem Elokim, is in the image of God. And all Jews have a special gift and relationship with God, and we share that. And if the biggest thing I can see when I see another Jew is Democrat or Republican, I'm off. I'm missing something. So whether it be acts of kindness, whether it be just how I look at another person, let's please not get distracted by very worthwhile things and maybe very important things. The person's accomplishments, the person's relationship with us, the person's political views are important, but still, let's not get distracted. Let's see the beautiful neshama, the beautiful soul sitting opposite us, and let's smile and relish the great opportunity to interact with another special human being. Have a wonderful Shabbos.